Hi everyone. We are going to review the histology of the stomach. So you are seeing two photos here. The photo to the left is of a lower magnification, so we're able to see the four layers of the alimentary canal. And the photo to the right is a higher magnification where we're specifically zooming in on the mucosal layer. So we can see some and identify some specific parts here of that mucosal layer. So looking first at the lower magnification photo, let's go through and label the four main layers of the alimentary canal. So first, just as point of reference, this area here that you see running through the middle that's clear, this is what we call the lumen. The lumen is the hollow space inside the stomach. So when you consume food and you swallow down the esophagus and it ends up in the stomach, the lumen is where the food is landing, okay? So in contact with the lumen, working our way deep and then out to superficial, we're first going to encounter the mucosal layer. The mucosal layer is this pink area here. That's what we call the mucosa. Okay, so we're going to label that mucosa. Now, specifically, the mucosa has three parts to it. There is the portion that comes in contact with the lumen, which we would just call it the epithelium. That would be the epithelial tissue that lines the lumen. That's this area right in here. Okay. Then below that, we encounter some connective tissue. It's mainly areolar CT, but you can find cuboidal cells here as well, which are glandular cells secreting some gastric juices. So right in there is a connective tissue layer. We would call this layer the lamina propria. That's what this would be known as. And then below that is a very thin muscular layer right here, known as the muscularis mucosa. Now that muscularis mucosa does not play a huge role in motility like you would think most muscle would do. It's very, very thin. Its main purpose is just to produce ridges in the lining that increase surface area. More surface area means more space for digestive and absorption activities, okay? So all three of these arrows that you see, in that this is all part of the mucosa. So this is our epithelial layer. This is our connective tissue layer. Lamina propria is what we would call that. And this is our muscularis mucosa. Now, we're not going to specifically label that. I'm not going to ask you to label those three on test. But when you're studying in your lecture notes, you are going to see these three parts described as part of the mucosa. So I wanted to point those out just to kind of align these two things, I guess, to bring these to your attention. So when you're studying and reading through your notes, like, oh yeah, those are those three parts. I saw those. Okay, so below the mucosa, we're now going to identify the submucosa. Submucosa is this lighter area right here. Submucosa is mainly areolar connective tissue. And this is also where we're first going to encounter the nerve innervation that helps control digestive activities. There is a specific nerve plexus. The word plexus just means network. So there's a network of nerves or a plexus of nerves here known as the Meissner's plexus. The Meissner's plexus, again, sends parasympathetic impulses to help control digestive activities. Below the submucosa, we're going to have the main muscle layer, which we just simply call the muscularis layer. So this here, in this darker pink, below the submucosa, is what we would call muscularis. Okay? And remember, most of the alimentary canal, there are two layers of muscles in the muscularis layer. There is a longitudinal muscle that runs lengthwise along the organ, and then there's a circular muscle that runs around. And it's the kind of the alternating contractions and relaxations of these two layers that keeps the food moving through the GI tract. We call that peristalsis. So that motility that keeps the digestive activities working and the food traveling through the organs, that's accomplished by this muscularis layer. Now, the stomach has three layers of muscles. Not only is there a longitudinal and a circular, but there is an oblique layer on the surface of the stomach. So your stomach is actually capable of doing a little bit more churning than what your small intestine and large intestine is capable of doing. Okay, moving below the muscularis layer, we have the serosa. The serosa is this outermost part here. You can kind of tell it's a little bit different in pattern. Pattern changes a bit with the serosa. The serosa has a couple of parts to it. The outermost area that comes in contact with the body cavity, so the very, very bottom of that serosal layer, that's epithelial tissue. It's actually simple squamous epithelial tissue. This is what we would call the mesothelium. And then a little bit deeper within and in contact with the muscularis, there's layers of connective tissue that help to support and attach your serosa with your muscularis. So here's our 4 layers of the alimentary canal: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. That's deep out to superficial, okay? Now turning our attention to the photo on the right, this is still the stomach, but now we're at a higher magnification and we're able to see specific details of the mucosa. So I want to bring your attention to 2 parts here we're going to label. First, you can see these indentations. Here is a little dip. Here is another dip. We would call these gastric pits. Gastric pits. And these indentations contain cells that produce mucus to help keep the stomach coated, the lining of the stomach coated and protected, and also cells that secrete enzymes for digestive purposes. You have parietal cells, chief cells. These secrete pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid. You have what's called G cells that secrete gastrin that help to hormonally control digestive activities. And then down deeper, you have a collection of what's called gastric glands. These gastric glands are these cuboidals that you see. If you remember from AMP1, I usually would compare cuboidal epithelial tissue to donuts, because there's typically an apical surface or free surface in the middle, and then the epithelial cells form this circle around them. So if you look real close, you can kind of see these clusters of cells almost look like little tiny donuts. These are glandular cells. It's cuboidal epithelial tissue is what it's made of. And we would call these, I circled several of them there just to kind of bring the clusters to your attention. We would call these gastric glands. Now, these gastric glands help to produce the gastric enzymes that are going to bubble up from those gastric pits and then eventually reach the lumen for digestive activities, and also hormone secretion there to help control those digestive activities. So this is the anatomy of the stomach, and specifically the histology. So you're looking at the tissue level of the layers of the stomach.